My name is Marcus Cole, and I want to tell you about the day my life changed forever. Not because of luck, not because of some grand plan, but because a ship was broken, and I could not walk away from a broken thing. I was 34 years old. I had been living in deep space for 6 straight years, working as a field engineer for Helix Salvage and Repair, a small company that nobody had ever heard of, and nobody important ever called. My job was simple: go where the big companies would not go, fix what the big companies would not touch, and charge just enough to keep my little ship running and my onboard AI, Grix, from complaining too loudly. I had no family waiting for me anywhere. I had no grand ambitions. I had calloused hands, a good toolkit, and a stubborn belief that nothing was ever truly broken beyond fixing. That belief was about to matter more than I knew. The outer drift is a long, dark corridor of space between 2 major trade routes. It is full of dead satellites, broken cargo containers, and the kind of silence that presses against the walls of a small ship and makes a person feel very small. I had been sweeping through it for 3 days, looking for salvageable material, when Grix interrupted my coffee with 3 words that did not belong together. "Vhorran military beacon," it said. I set my coffee down very slowly. The vhorran were one of the 7 elder races. They had been traveling between stars while human beings were still making pottery out of clay and calling it an achievement. Their ships were designed by minds that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the science of space travel. Their technology was so far beyond ours that most other species in the galaxy did not even bother comparing the two. A vhorran ship did not break down, and even if one did, by some impossible accident, it would certainly not send a distress beacon to a human salvage contractor operating alone in the middle of nowhere. And yet, distance? I asked. 40,000 kilometers. Drive plasma venting, hull stable. Estimated time to critical cascade failure, 11 minutes. I was already moving. I want to be clear about something. I did not rush toward that ship because I was brave. I did not rush toward it because I thought I would become famous, or because I had some noble plan forming in my head. I rushed toward it because something was broken, and a clock was running, and those 2 facts together are like a direct instruction written into my bones. Grix pushed the throttle, and I started reviewing every piece of vhorran engineering knowledge I had quietly collected over 6 years of working in the places where elder race ships sometimes ended up in pieces. I knew one thing that the galaxy did not expect me to know. A resonance fracture, a feedback loop in the graviton coil system, was not always a death sentence. If you caught it early enough, and if you were willing to think sideways about it, there were things you could do that were not in any official manual. They were not in the official manual because no official engineer would ever use them. They were improvised. They were inelegant. They were exactly the kind of solution that a human field engineer working alone in the drift comes up with when elegance is not an option and the clock is still running. The ship that came into view was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in the outer drift, even with plasma venting from its side and its axis tilted wrong. It was built like something drawn by a hand that had never seen an ugly line. Even broken, it had a kind of dignity that made my own battered little ship feel like a shoebox. I hailed them. The face that appeared on my screen stopped me for just a moment. She was tall. I could see that even through the visual feed. Silver blue light traced along her jaw and behind her ears, in delicate, glowing lines, like circuits drawn in living ink. Her eyes were a deep, still blue, and they were looking at me with an expression that I can only describe as carefully restrained alarm. "You," she said, "are human." "Guilty," I said. "Marcus Cole, Helix Salvage. You have a resonance fracture developing in your secondary drive manifold. It is going to cascade into your primary coils in about 8 minutes. I can stop it. I need you to drop your docking shields and let me aboard." There was a pause. Behind her, I could see her crew moving with trained precision, but none of them were fixing the problem, which told me they had already determined it could not be fixed. At least, not the way they were trained to fix things. "A human engineer," she said, very carefully, "cannot interface with vhorran drive architecture." "Normally no," I agreed. 7 minutes. Another pause. The light along her jaw changed in a way I could not quite read. Then she said, quietly, to someone off to the side, "Lower the docking shields." Her name was Commander Velana of House Shear. She told me this in the 40 seconds it took her to escort me from the docking collar to the engine compartment, and the way she said it, all of it, the full title, the house name, made me think she was reminding herself of who she was, because whatever was about to happen was going to be strange, and she wanted something solid to stand on. Her lieutenant, a broad-shouldered vhorran named Davin, was waiting in the engine room with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who has already decided how this story ends. He did not want me there. He made that clear in the way that very competent people who have run out of solutions sometimes make their objections clear, loudly, and with reference to official procedures. Our own engineers have assessed this, he said. The crystalline sealant housing cannot be repaired without replacement components. The nearest vhorran supply station is too far, I said, and crouched beside the cracked manifold housing. I ran my fingers along the fracture line. The feedback vibration was already stronger than I liked. I am not going to fix it the way you would fix it. I looked up at Velana. I need a plasma welder, conductive bonding tape, the kind you use for electrical conduit work, and your highest temperature thermal compound, whatever you have on board. Silence. She looked at me for 3 long seconds. Then she said, "Get him what he needs." And Devon looked as though he had bitten something unexpected and was deciding whether to spit it out. Here is what I knew that they did not know I knew. Vhorran crystalline resonance architecture is extraordinarily precise, but precision has a weakness. It is designed to work perfectly. It is not designed to fail gracefully. When it cracks in ways that its own engineers are trained to solve only with perfect replacement components, because that is the only solution the system was built to accept. But a fracture is still a fracture, and a fracture can be braced. The bonding tape, layered correctly and heat-sealed at the right temperature, would hold the fractured housing rigid enough to stop the feedback from spreading. The thermal compound, theirs was actually far better than anything I had used before, designed for a completely different application, but chemically suited to absorb resonance spikes, would act as a buffer between the brace and the coil, damping the fluctuations that were threatening to cascade. It would not be a repair, it would be a bridge, strong enough to hold, long enough to get them somewhere they could do it properly. Velahana stayed in the engine room the entire time. She did not hover nervously or give instructions I had not asked for. She stood back and watched, and occasionally she asked a question. The questions were precise and intelligent. When I explained my reasoning, she listened in the particular way that very capable people listen when they have encountered something that does not fit their existing map of the world. At one point she crouched beside me, close enough that I could see the faint shift in her bioluminescent markings when the coils fluctuated. A stress response, I realized, that she was not fully in control of. "You understand the resonance frequency distribution?" she asked. "You have mapped it?" "More or less. I am doing it by feel." "By feel," she repeated. "The welder gives me vibration feedback. The pitch of the coil hum changes when the resonance is destabilized. You can hear it if you listen for it. There. Do you hear that shift?" She was quiet. "Yes," she said, and she sounded like someone who had just opened a door that she had not known was there. The repair took 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Grix was counting in my earpiece, increasingly pessimistic with each passing moment. Velana had a countdown display visible on the wall panel, and I could see it in my peripheral vision, which I strongly advise against if you want your hands to stay steady. They stayed steady. I have been fixing things under pressure for long enough that my hands have made a separate peace with the concept of urgency. With 40 seconds remaining, I sealed the final layer, ran the thermal compound along the brace, and told them to attempt a controlled restart. The engine room went quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when everyone has stopped breathing at once. The coils hummed. Even, steady, not perfect. I could hear the slight harmonic difference that told me my brace was compensating rather than curing. But it was clean. It was stable. The countdown stopped. Davin made a sound that was not quite a word. Velana stood. She looked at the manifold display. She looked at me. Something moved across her face that I cannot fully describe, even now. It was the look of a person reorganizing something important inside their mind. "It holds," she said. "It holds," I said. "You have about 30 hours before you need a proper repair station. I have a contact at Miravi Junction. An independent shop that works with non-standard configurations. I can send ahead and let them know you are coming." She looked at me for a moment. "Why would you do that?" I did not understand the question at first. "Because you will need the help," I said. "We have no treaty relationship. You have no obligation to us." "Your ship was broken, and I could fix it," I said. That seemed like reason enough. She was quiet for a long time after that. She asked me to stay for a meal. Not as a diplomatic formality, she asked, which I would later learn was a meaningful distinction in her culture. I stayed. The food was extraordinary and unidentifiable, and I ate everything because my mother would have expected nothing less. Vhorran watched my reactions with careful curiosity, and we talked across a table while Davin sat nearby, with an expression that had evolved, over the course of the evening, from hostile to merely thoughtful, which felt like significant progress. She asked about my work. I told her about the drift, about salvage, about the particular education you receive when the only option is to figure it out yourself in the dark, with limited tools, and a deadline that does not care whether you are ready. She listened to all of it the way she had listened in the engine room, completely, without performing interest, because the interest was real. I asked about her. She told me about the diplomatic corps, about House Shear, about the cargo she was carrying, the weight of it, the responsibility of it. She told me about what it meant to be shaped by a culture into the precise form it required of you, and whether the shape was your own or something given to you. "You said earlier that you wanted to understand my answer," I said, near the end of the meal. "Why, that was reason enough." "Yes. I think it is simpler than it sounds," I said. "Humans do not really have a protocol for not helping when something is broken in front of us. Not fixing it takes more effort than fixing it. We are built that way, backwards maybe, compared to a species that has had 10,000 years to develop proper procedures." Her markings shifted, warmer, softer. "Built backwards," she said quietly. "The hegemony's formal assessment of humanity is that you are a young species, peripheral, underdeveloped in all the ways that the hegemony considers important." "I know. We hear that fairly often." "I think," she said, choosing each word with care, "that the hegemony has been measuring with the wrong instruments." 3 months later, a message arrived through her personal command cipher, not from a diplomatic office, from Vhorran directly. It contained 2 things. The first was a vhorran engineering access certification. It is a credential that most species require decades of formal study to receive. No human being had ever been granted one. The note attached to it said only, "For knowing when to listen to what the machine is telling you." The second was an invitation to join a small, unconventional team she was assembling for an extended mission into the outer regions, the unmapped space beyond the drift, beyond the comfortable borders of everything the hegemony had charted and labeled and decided it understood. She needed engineers who could think sideways, who could work in the dark with the wrong tools and the right instincts, who would not freeze when the official procedures ran out. She was asking for me specifically. At the bottom of the message, in shorthand I would come to recognize as hers, she had written, "I have continued to think about your answer. I would like to continue the conversation in person, over a longer period of time, in the places where things break in interesting ways, if you are willing." I sat with that message for a long time. Grix, as always, broke the silence first. "Your biometrics suggest elevated heart rate and something resembling giddiness," it said. "Should I be concerned?" "No," I said. "Pull up coordinates for a vhorran military staging point in Sector 14. Plot me a course." "May I ask why?" I read the message one more time. "Because something is waiting out there," I said, "and I think it is going to be a lot more interesting than the drift." Grix made the sound it makes when it disagrees, but has decided, for once, not to argue. Then it plotted the course.